So I'm going to be talking about today how we are using GenAI for productivity at Wealthsimple, with a focus on our internal tools, some of the use cases, and what we learned, the lessons we learned through adoption. So to start, a little bit of context about Wealthsimple. So Wealthsimple is a Canadian fintech company, and our mission is to help Canadians achieve their version of financial independence. And we do this through our unified app where investing, spending, and saving come together as one. At Wealthsimple, our LLM efforts are primarily organized into 3 streams. So the first is employee productivity, and this was our original thesis of how LLMs can add value. And this has been an area of continued investment, and as we're building our muscles, gaining more confidence, applying LLMs internally, we've graduated and started moving into areas of optimizing operations. So leveraging these technologies to create a more delightful experience for our clients. And last but certainly not least, we have the LLM platform, which acts as an enablement function that supports the first 2 pillars. When it comes to our LLM enablement philosophy, it's centered around 3 themes. So the first is accessibility, security, and optionality. So when we started on our LLM journey, we wanted to focus on a way of leveraging this technology in an accessible and secure way. Our goal was to really make the secure path the path of least resistance so that we can enable the freedom to explore while also protecting our data. And then we also, of course, wanted to provide optionality across different types of foundational models, techniques, because we recognized there wasn't one single method that would do a given task best. And we wanted to leave this decision to our end users and the folks within the company who will be harnessing GenAI. And through these investments to our platform, we have a few wins to share in the past year. So around a year ago, we developed and open source our LLM gateway, which is used internally by over half of the company. We've also developed and shipped our own in-house PI redaction model. So anything that before we send it externally to one of our GenAI partners, we will pass the inputs to our PI redaction model, redact any sensitive information and before sending it out. And we've also made it really easy to deploy open source models, open source LLMs within our own cloud environments. And to date, we've deployed 4 open source LLMs this way. And we've built up the platform support for fine-tuning and model training with hardware acceleration. So while we don't have anything to show yet, we're really excited about our fine-tuning journey and what that will bring us in the coming weeks and months. And then lastly, we do have a few examples of LLMs in production optimizing operations. 2 of my colleagues, Josh and Kia, will actually be speaking about some of these applications next week, and I'll highlight a quick one towards the end of my presentation as well. So the first internal tool we created on our LLM journey was our LLM gateway. So this is a screenshot of what our LLM gateway looks like, and the motivation was that when ChatGPT first became popularized, the general awareness for fourth-party data sharing was not at the same level it is today. So a lot of companies inadvertently overshared information with OpenAI, which led to a lot of the sensitive information being available publicly. And with the gateway, we wanted to avoid that. We wanted to inject this gateway between all LLMs that we use, and eventually this included our internal LLMs in addition to the external LLMs. We want to put this gateway between these models and Wealthsimple to ensure that they were super accessible. We're talking to them in a secure way. And as we started thinking about operating LLMs at scale, that we would have the proper fallback mechanisms to create a reliable experience. So I'm going to show a quick demo of the LLM gateway. It's pre-recorded. But this is what our LLM gateway looks like. So on the left-hand side, we have a sidebar to manage our chats, and then our chat is very front and center in the screen. So to create a new chat, we hit the new chat button. We can name the chat, and we can select any one of these models that are either self-hosted on our cloud environment or from one of our external third-party GenAI partners. So we have models from OpenAI, Cohere, and also from Gemini, the foundational GCP models. So first I'm going to show a quick demo with GPT-4. And because this is an external GenAI provider, the PI redaction model will redact any sensitive information before sharing it. So the first message I sent, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it's my phone number is 416 made up phone number. And then right away, the LLM is confused. And if you ask it, like, what did I just say to you? It'll show that, okay, you said your phone number is ~4, but because the message is redacted, they can't see the actual PII. And then we have a few different custom defined PII types. There's like the standard PII types such as name, email, address, etc. And then there are also some that are very specific to Wealthsimple as well. So, but if you talk to any of our models that are self-hosted, because this data never leaves our cloud environment, we don't have the PII redaction model running here, and the same prompt will not be redacted. So I'm just showing with the same prompt that, okay, like Llama 3, which is one of our self-hosted models, was able to see the unredacted output. And the next feature I kind of want to show is what we internally call our checkpoint functionality. So we have the option to download conversations and also upload conversations. And the motivation of this is really to create like this blended chat experience across different models. So very simple prompt here, write me a haiku. I'm talking to GPT 3.5 Turbo. But there's a little button on the right side corner where I can download the conversation, and this will actually save it as a CSV file. And then I can take another model, let's say Llama 3, and continue the conversation with the same file. So this is useful when, again, like you want to like have a blended experience across conversations, but also like as people are experimenting, they may want to actually like manually edit some of these conversations. So they could actually like synthetically modify how the LLM responds with. And then the last feature I wanted to kind of demo on our LLM gateway is the multimodal outputs. So this is a trend that the industry as a whole is moving towards. We're finding that text is, although once upon a time it was revolutionary when we were able to chat with LLMs in just plain English, is now becoming a very frictionful medium of communication. And having multimodal inputs through audio, files, etc. is creating less frictionful mediums, and one area that the industry is trending into. So we've added multimodal inputs to our gateway as well, and we do this through the Gemini models. The Gemini 1.5 series, the reason we leverage these models in particular is one unique aspect about the Gemini models is they have the very long context window. So Gemini 1.5 has 1 million or 2 million, they can accept 1 to 2 million tokens. And because of this, we can actually take the file or the multimodal input, extract the information out of it, and bake it within the prompt itself. So here I'm uploading a file for Gemini, and this file is a screenshot of a Swagger API doc that I took. And this is actually a very common use case because on like one of my, like I manage platform teams, and a lot of our end users are developers or data scientists. Oftentimes they'll like just take a screenshot of their stack trace or error message and just throw it at us. And there's actually a lot of toil like extracting the information out of that to like make sense of it. But now I can just upload an image like this and say, okay, help me understand this API documentation. Or if this had been a stack trace instead, like maybe I could have asked it to help me debug. Unfortunately, I did not have the oversight to show the actual image in this demo, but this is a pretty accurate representation of what the contract looked like. And we can also support multi-file uploads. So one other common use case is for non-technical folks to upload multiple documents, kind of compare and contrast between the two. So here I'm uploading the paper for Flash Attention, as well as a research paper McKinsey did for a non-technical audience about the economic potential of generative AI. And I asked our gateway to kind of summarize both of the articles, and it gave a summary of the first one. The first PDF is a research paper on Flash Attention, et cetera, et cetera. The second PDF is a report from McKinsey and Company on the economic potential of generative AI. And with these contexts uploaded, I can ask our gateway to do like further manipulations and to like have this conversation against this context. So that's our LLM gateway in a nutshell. And and then I wanted to really quickly touch on the LLM gateway engagement metrics. So these are our daily active users, weekly active users, and then monthly active users since last September. That's around the time we started actually tracking these metrics. So all of these graphs are actually trending in a great direction. Like our daily, weekly, monthly usage is increasing time over time. There's some interesting patterns as well. As you can see, December was a bit of a slow month for us. A lot of people were on vacation, so a lot less usage. But then during the new year, like the team spent a lot of time evangelizing and just kind of marketing that we have this tool, and that led to an increase in the adoption and usage as well. So in addition to the LLM Gateway, we have a suite of other GenAI tools. We've actually developed an internal data applications platform that makes it really easy for people to prototype and share and just kind of test out new tools that they can think of. And the result of that is a lot of our data scientists and some even our non-technical folks at the company have built their own GenAI tools. And some of these tools, such as Booster Pack, have been met with a lot of popularity and a lot of usage. So one thing I want to say before I start playing this demo is Booster Pack is a tool we've had for a while, and I think as you watch the demo, you'll notice it's actually very similar to like how we approach the multimodal outputs. The distinction here is that this uses a retrieval augmented generation, so it uses a RAG system. And one difference in that is that whereas for multimodal, you're enriching the conversation with like the other types of outputs. Here, we're really grounding the conversation against the context that's uploaded. So going forward, we do have plans of kind of better consolidating these tools, but for the time being, like one unique way that people are using Booster Pack is in pre-creating public knowledge bases, and then building a retrieval system on top of that for our employees to ask questions. So I ramble for quite a bit, but hopefully the video will make this more clear. So first functionality is I upload a file. This is actually the same McKinsey research paper from the other demo. So if I can create for Booster Pack 3 different types of knowledge bases. So public, which is accessible to all Wealthsimple employees, and this includes pre-created knowledge bases such as our source code, help articles, and financial newsletters. I can also create a private knowledge base, which is what I'm doing here in this demo, and private knowledge base means it's only available to me. And this is where I can store and query my personal documents. And then I also can create a limited knowledge base, which based on the different roles and working groups within the company can be shared with a limited set of coworkers delineated by role and project. And this again uses so it's a retrieval system grounded against the context being uploaded. So here's a few examples from a private knowledge base where I'm asking some questions that are kind of lifted from the article itself on the intersection between GenAI and productivity. So we have, in addition to being able to upload things on the fly, we have a few nightly jobs that actually takes knowledge bases that are pertinent to most of the company. So our source code, help center, and our Notion documents, and we'll use those to create the public knowledge sources, and we keep them up to date for people to query against them. Oh, I think I messed up the format of my slides. Okay. So before I kind of dig into like how people are using GenAI, I want to just really quickly touch on our GenAI build versus buy philosophy. So this philosophy is something that's constantly evolving, and the creation of the LLM Gateway and all of our other internal tools kind of helps shape it into what it is today. So I guess to start off with, how do we decide whether to build something versus buy something? Because we do recognize a lot of the tools we build internally, there are going to be like buy versions of them like out there. Like we could very well be buying them instead. There's 3 things that we take into consideration. The first is, of course, security and privacy. We want to make sure that the vendors we work with, the tools we buy, that they meet our security and privacy requirements, and that we're able to, again, leverage this technology in a very safe way and to keep our data protected. The second is time to market and cost. So one thing that we find, so one analogy I like to use is what's happening in the GenAI vendor space is very similar to this whole streaming versus cable dilemma. So at one point when Netflix first came out, it was like the much superior like alternative to cable. But now we have like 10 streaming platforms, and it's no longer economical to like buy all of those. Like cable is actually seeming to be the better option in some of these cases. And it's a very similar scenario with GenAI as well, right? Like every single vendor, almost every single vendor out there is coming up with their own very unique, very bespoke GenAI products. Like we have the Slack AI integration. We have, like Notion has its own AI integration. And it's not economical for us to buy every single one of them. But on the other hand, we have to think about time to market and the cost if we were able to if we were developing this in-house as well. And then lastly, we want to consider our unique points of leverage. We've found a lot of success with GenAI internally, not just with the tools we're building, but with like the applications where we're actually optimizing our operations. So that's something we have to constantly weigh our time against. Like if we spend all of our time building tools that we could be buying, like that's taking us away from doing things that only we can do with our proprietary data. So as a result, so some of the trends that's kind of influencing our decision based on these axioms, the two trends to kind of call out is that more vendors, both existing and new, are offering their GenAI integration. So we have to become a lot more strategic about what we buy and what we don't buy. And then secondly, the general security and privacy awareness in vendors are actually improving a lot. A lot of vendors they're thinking about ways to help protect your data, keep it contained within your cloud environment, and creating a more lucrative opportunity to buy instead of build. So a lot of the tools that we chose to build in the past, we may not have chosen to build again, but at the same time, we had a lot of learnings internally from creating and evangelizing those tools, and we've built up not only expertise internally, but a lot of the confidence and the guardrails for us to operate GenAI at scale. So I also want to spend a little bit of time digging into like how we're using GenAI and the intersection between that and productivity. So the insights I'm about to share, a lot of it was we send out like periodic surveys to like users, not just of our tools, but also people who aren't using it and just the company as a whole. And we're constantly doing a lot of like user interviews, client interviews. And these were some of the insights that kind of stood out to us. The first is that almost everyone we talked to, and from our survey results, almost everyone who used LLMs found it to have significantly increased their productivity. So not too much of a surprise, but it was great to see like the lift this technology had on productivity. At Wealthsimple, close to 50% of this adoption is driven by teams within research and development, so fairly technical folks. But adoption is uniform across tenure and level. So if we compare engagement between like individual contributors and managers, it's a lot more uniform than by department. And in terms of how we're using LLMs internally, so this was based on a sampled use case. The top 3 categories are programming support, content generation, and information retrieval. And this basically makes up like the bulk of our use cases. Not that surprising considering that most of our user base comes from engineering. And then when we talked to people who weren't using our LLM tools, there were a few themes that we kind of took away from those conversations. The first is that the PI redaction models, we really interfered with their use cases. So a lot of our employees, through their day-to-day work, they do actually need to leverage and work with PII. And when we redact it, it obscurates this information and doesn't allow them to like leverage like ChatGPT or the OpenAI models like at their fullest potential. So one solution that we put forward to kind of mitigate this concern is to start self-hosting our own models with no PII masking. But at the same time, there's always going to be a need where people want to use a model that we haven't self-hosted. Another common theme of concern is just the general risks around GenAI, like bias, hallucination, like no updates in the training data, like some of these common concerns within the industry, and we kind of summed it up as GenAI being unreliable. We don't have a perfect solution for this, but some of the ways that we're mitigating against bias and hallucination is like one, elevating best practices. So there's some use cases that GenAI will be good for. There are other use cases where it will not be good for. And even depending on how you frame the task could lead to like very different end results and performance. And at the same time, we're providing the tools for grounding and fine-tuning. And with both of these methods, it gives us more control over either the foundational model or the context that's being used to drive the conversation. And then lastly, and this is kind of surprising, I think, like especially to those of us who are like living and breathing GenAI for the past year and a half. The awareness outside of like certain spaces for GenAI and what it can do is not very high. So even within like our company, we saw that a lot of people were actually unaware of how GenAI worked, how LLMs worked, and how it can help them with their work. So there was definitely a gap in terms of education and evangelism, especially for the non-technical teams. And throughout the past year, we've also learned 2 lessons in behavior. A lot of this did come from feedback and in studying our engagement patterns. The first is that LLM tools are the most valuable, or a proxy for most valuable is the most utilized. The tools are most valuable when injected in the places we do work, and the movement of information between platforms is a huge detractor. So thinking about something like Copilot, which has been wildly successful, I'm not sure if it would have the same level of success if it wasn't integrated within the editors directly, if we had to go to a different UI to have those capabilities. And then kind of going hand in hand with the first learning, having to visit multiple places of work for GenAI is a very confusing experience. And how we saw this personally is that as a number of tools grew, most people stuck to using a single tool. And this is what makes it really important for us, especially now that we have multimodal support on our gateway and Booster Pack, which has like similar offerings, to really start consolidating these tools into a single place. And ultimately what we want to do is we want to abstract that cognitive complexity of choosing the right tool for the right job from our end users and make that a more seamless experience in an integrated environment. So our Turno tools really helped us establish the building blocks to build GenAI at scale. The guardrails, best practices, and learnings we developed gave us the confidence to find opportunities to optimize operations for our clients. And the freedom to explore GenAI in various domains helped us identify those use cases. So we have a few different use cases of GenAI, of like LLM applications being used to improve the client experience. And I'm just gonna really quickly touch on one. So this example is with our client experience triaging workflow. So a little bit of context. Before we injected ML into this space, what used to happen is we would have a dedicated team of people just sifting through like the very high volume of tickets we get from our clients to determine which team it should be sent to. And then at a certain point in time, we're like, hey, we can actually just like automate this. Like we can use machine learning to automate this. And what we've built was a transformer-based model that we developed in-house. And what the model would do is would take a ticket. An example of a ticket could be something like, I'm trying to open an account and it's not letting me upload my driver's license. And then we would map this ticket to like a topic and a subtopic. And given this topic and subtopic, we would have heuristics to triage this to the right team. So this was a game changer when it was released, and it saved so much time, and not only saving time, but it was actually doing a lot better than what our team of CX agents, because of the volume they had to handle, what they were able to do. And this ended up becoming a very natural extension of GenAI. So one way that we're approaching GenAI at Wealthsimple is we don't want it to be a hammer in search of nails. We don't want to just like force GenAI into every single existing workflow or into workflows where we think it could be beneficial. And we want this to be instead, we want this to be a lot more organic. And this use case kind of like came up as we were like looking at gaps within the existing client experience triaging workflows. And we actually found 2 ways that this technology can be used to enrich it. So the first is with Whisper. So Whisper is a voice transcription model, and it's technically not an LLM, but because of like a lot of the marketing that OpenAI has done, like we are also considering this as part of our LLM platform. So we have Whisper, so voice transcription model takes an audio recording and transcribes that into like plain text. So we have a Whisper model because it's open source. We have it open source within our cloud environment. And with Whisper, we were able to extend triaging to all tickets. So before, we could only use this workflow for like text-based tickets. But now like we can do it for like voice calls, which helped improve its coverage. And we're using generations from our self-hosted LLMs to enrich the classification. So we're adding a lot of the metadata that's helpful to our CX agents, and we're actually using this as a way to like label and close and just help our annotators with their workflows as we're evaluating new iterations of these models. So this is the kind of patterns that we're looking for when applying GenAI for our clients, like really just looking for that very organic place and enabling the rest of the company across various domains to explore this technology and then helping support them as they scale those prototypes to production. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Mandy. Just before we move to Q&A, there is an announcement from the organizer. So there will be a social after this session at Amsterdam Brewhouse at 245 Krinsky West. Okay, yeah. Now open the floor for any questions.
Yeah, excellent presentation. I have so many questions, but I'll pick one. There are more than 40% of employees using this gateway for programming help, right? So we go PII, which is good. So how we can protect our IP of the code using the public models? Any practice or any solutions we are investigating?
That's a great question. So those were kind of the categories that we came up with, but most of those categories did not actually involve us like passing our entire code base. So how we're trying to manage this internally is, first of all, we do use Copilot, and because of the special licensing agreements we have with GitHub, like we are encouraging our employees to leverage Copilot wherever you can, but people are still finding areas where they prefer to use a gateway, or maybe like it's a picture and it's like a picture being shared between Slack, and that's the better way. We do also have self-hosted models. One of the models, I don't think this was visible in the demo, but we also do have like models fine-tuned on code. So that's a lot of the self-hosted models people are using for programming support, and those live within our VPC, so we're very comfortable using them. We also do, so we're primarily an AWS shop, but we do have like a Google Cloud account as well, and we treat the Gemini models, which run on GCP, we don't treat them as the same level of security we do as our primary like cloud account, but this is still like a safer environment to have those conversations than like directly with OpenAI as an example.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My question is, can you give an example of the trade-off that you have to navigate through, particularly in the time to the market, the consideration that you had?
Sorry, can you say the first part again?
So can you go through like an example of the trade-off that you had to go through in that time to market aspect of buy versus build?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have two examples of internal tools that worked really well for us. Like one was the LLM Gateway and the other was the Booster Pack. So we have a pretty good understanding based on these two examples, like how much work it would take internally for us to build this. So with the LM Gateway, it took us 5 days to build it initially, and then probably a few hundred hours afterwards, just iterating, improving, and making sure it has parity with like a lot of the trends in the industry. Booster Pack took a little longer. So we do have an understanding, at least on a high level, of like the time to develop this. And usually when we approach a new problem, some of the things that we would look into is, okay, if we were to build this internally, what would it look like? How long would it take, and what would have to be deprioritized if we do this? And I think that's the most important question, right? Like we have a lot of competing priorities, so we have to make like the highest ROI for our time.
In the back here? Thanks for the presentation. So I had a couple questions, both related to the LLM gateway and the fact that it supports multiple models. So one of the questions was, did you have any challenges in the prompt engineering layer behind? Because like if you're redacting PII and stuff, did you have to sort of like modify the prompts for every single LLM a little bit, or were you able to use a standard set of prompts in general? And the second question was also because you mentioned Gemini and stuff, there are quotas around each of these models. So when you're rolling out to your organization and enterprise, did you have to get around those quotas and have to do a bunch of load testing and put in things to manage those quotas at all?
Yeah, those are great questions. So for the first question, yeah, we do actually, our prompt engineering, like our prompt, we experimented with a few different prompts, and what we have in production, there is like one snippet at the end of like the usual "you're a helpful AI assistant" that's saying like, we do mass PII. If you see tilde, this is PII being masked. So it is baked a little bit in the prompt. I do think we could probably do a better job on the user experience part to show them what was masked, and there's probably like some room for improvement on the back end as well. But that's a great question. And then for the quotas for the Gemini models, so we are tracking them, and we're not very close to hitting the rate limit. So I think we're in a good spot there. This might be because of like our relationship with like GCP, but like the request per minutes, like all of the other quotas they gave us are like, they're very generous, and we are not anywhere close to the scale that would get us rate limited.
Hi, I just have a quick question on like how you're using LLMs internally. I think you mentioned about information retrieval. Can you give some examples of that?
A lot of it is whereas before people would look at documentation, like now they just ask an LLM. If there's a concept that's like unclear to them, they would just ask LLM to explain it to them. So I think those two are the two most common use cases that I've seen.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was wondering, how do you manage maintaining the tools that you've already made, going from Llama 3 to Llama 4? And also developing new products, like integrating what you have made in Slack or your customer-facing products?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one philosophy we have as a platform team is like to really maximize our points of leverage. So we try to make things really easy for ourselves. So an example of this would be like, we understood pretty early on that because of how quickly this field is moving, like we're going to have to like continuously cycle through different self-hosted models. So a lot of time and effort went into how can we make this process as simple as possible. So the first self-hosted model that we deployed, it took 2 weeks, but then the last one took 20 minutes. So we're constantly finding ways of making that faster to kind of just reduce the maintenance burdens for us. A lot of our roadmap is driven by talking to our stakeholders, talking to our clients, and doing those end user interviews. Their pain points, their wants, their use cases help drive a lot of that roadmap. And then we pair that as well with like the interest on the team itself, and then some higher, and if applicable, how we can link this to like higher business priorities. One thing is that like on the ML engineering front, it's a very small team. There's only actually 3 people, and they're not just responsible for the GenAI tools and the GenAI the use cases in production, but they're also the machine learning platform team that's responsible for doing the same with our ML models. So definitely prioritization and planning is an area we spend a lot of time in.
So you mentioned that you fine-tuned a code model, but have you done fine-tuning on other models? And if so, why would you do it on those particular ones?
Oh, we didn't fine-tune them. They were just open-sourced models that were fine-tuned on code, and we just leveraged them as it is. So I think that we are looking into areas where we can fine-tune our own models, and like definitely code, fine-tune them with our code is not at the top of our priority list. I don't know if I can share this, but maybe I could in a few months. There's a few use cases we're exploring, and some of them are looking quite promising.
All right, we have one more question.
Hi, so did you put in any checks on the on-prem version to avoid hallucination, especially when it comes to document retrieval?
No, not really. I mean, there's been some experimentation with the prompt. That has helped a little bit, but most of it is through like setting the best like practices. And this is like not something we've integrated with our systems yet, but just kind of educating people on like, the good use cases versus the bad use cases for LLMs and like different ways of structuring problems so that you can get like the most reliable like answers. So that's really been the focus. And then on top of that, like grounding, and then as we move towards fine-tuning, will give us more control, but nothing like within our like retrieval systems that additionally provides additional guardrails.
Thank you.
Thank you.